In 1950s rural Montana, a broken-down rancher was about to make the most desperate bid of his life. What started as a routine visit to the town hall took a shocking turn when he came face-to-face with an 8-year-old half-Chinese girl nobody wanted. Sam Holloway wasn't your typical auction attendee. For 5 years, he had spent his life drowning in grief and financial ruin, known for his stubborn pride and the family ranch that was slipping through his fingers like sand. When he encountered Lucy Chen standing alone on that auction stage, rejected by family after family, he had no idea he was walking into a battle that would define both their futures. Sam raised his hand with $75 that would lead to a custody fight that split their community down the middle. What began as a desperate attempt to find cheap labor would become the most profound love story their small town had ever witnessed. The entire county would never be the same after a widowed rancher and an unwanted little girl proved that family isn't about blood. It's about the courage to choose love over fear again and again, no matter the cost. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The sun crested the Beartooth Mountains like a dying ember, casting long shadows across Sam Holloway's withered pastures. He stood on the weathered porch of the ranch house, coffee mug forgotten in his calloused hands, watching his cattle cluster around the nearly dry creek bed. Their ribs showed through patchy hides, and their mournful lowing carried on the hot wind that had blown steadily for 3 months without bringing a single drop of rain. 47 head left. There'd been nearly 200 when Sarah was alive. Sam's jaw tightened at the thought of his wife. 5 years dead, and he still caught himself listening for her laugh from the kitchen, still turned toward her side of the bed in those half-awake moments before dawn reminded him he was alone. The accident had taken more than Sarah and their unborn child. It had taken his ability to make sense of anything that came after. The Holloway Ranch had been in his family for 4 generations. His great-grandfather had claimed this land when Montana was still territory, had built the original cabin with his own hands, and defended it against everything the wilderness could throw at him. Each generation had added to it, improved it, passed it down with pride and the weight of legacy. Now, Sam was going to be the one to lose it all. A dust cloud rose from the county road, and Sam's stomach clenched. He knew that black sedan, knew the man who drove it with the deliberate slowness of someone who enjoyed delivering bad news. Frank Morrison, president of First National Bank, and the closest thing to a king this corner of Montana had ever seen. Sam set his coffee on the porch rail and walked down to meet Morrison halfway between the house and the road. The banker emerged from his car wearing a suit that cost more than most folks around here made in a month. His silver hair slicked back despite the morning heat. Sam. Morrison's smile didn't reach his pale eyes. Beautiful morning, isn't it? Get on with it, Frank. Morrison pulled a manila envelope from his jacket. Bank's board met yesterday. Given the circumstances, the drought, your payment history, we've accelerated the timeline. He held out the envelope like an offering. 90 days, Sam. That's what you've got to bring the account current. Sam took the papers, his hands steadied despite the tremor in his chest. $37,000. Might as well have been $37 million. Course, if you're ready to discuss selling, I know some developers who'd pay fair market value for the land. Not the ranch operation, mind you, but the acreage itself. Morrison's voice carried the false sympathy of a snake oil salesman. Might be your best option, considering. Considering what? Well, Sam, let's be honest. You haven't been the same since Sarah's passing. Understandable, of course, but facts are facts. The ranch is dying, and you're killing yourself trying to save it. Morrison gestured toward the house, the barn, the fields that stretched to the horizon. This place needs someone with the energy and resources to make it work, someone younger, someone with a family to build a future for. The words hit like physical blows. Sam felt the familiar weight of failure settling on his shoulders, the voice in his head that whispered all the ways he'd let everyone down. Sarah, their child who'd never drawn breath. His father, who'd trusted him with the family legacy. Morrison climbed back into his sedan. 90 days, Sam. After that, I can't help you. Sam stood in the dust cloud long after the car disappeared, staring at the papers in his hands. Foreclosure notice. The words blurred together, legal language that boiled down to a simple truth. He was about to lose everything that mattered. The sound of an approaching truck pulled him from his thoughts. Old Pete Kowalski's battered Ford wheezed to a stop where Morrison's sedan had been, and Pete climbed out with the deliberate movements of a man whose 70-year-old bones reminded him daily of every horse that had ever thrown him. Saw Frank leaving, Pete said without preamble. Looked pleased with himself. Sam handed him the notice. Pete read it in silence, his weathered face revealing nothing. 90 days, Pete said finally. 90 days. They stood together in comfortable silence. Two men who'd shared enough losses to know that some situations didn't call for empty reassurances. Pete had been Sam's neighbor for 20 years, had helped dig Sarah's grave when the ground was frozen, solid that January morning. If anyone understood the weight Sam carried, it was Pete. You hear about the orphanage? Pete asked eventually. What about it? Billy Thornton's doing some kind of auction thing. Winter sponsorship, he calls it. Families take in kids for the cold months, help with chores, that sort of thing. Pete scratched his grizzled chin. Might be worth looking into. Extra pair of hands around here, and you'd be helping a kid who needs it. Sam's first instinct was to refuse. He could barely take care of himself, let alone some orphaned child. But as he looked out at his struggling ranch, at the cattle that needed more attention than he could give them, at the endless list of repairs he couldn't afford to hire help for, a desperate idea began to form. When's this auction? Tonight. 7 o'clock at the town hall. That evening, Sam found himself sitting in the back row of folding chairs in the cramped town hall, hat in his hands, wondering what the hell he was doing. The room buzzed with conversation as families evaluated the children lined up on the small stage like livestock at market. Billy Thornton, a thin man with nervous eyes and a politician's false smile, explained the program's noble intentions while the children stood in awkward silence. Most of the kids found sponsors quickly. The younger ones, the prettier ones, the ones who looked like they'd fit seamlessly into respectable families. Sam watched couple after couple approach the stage, shake hands with Thornton, and lead their chosen child away to begin new temporary lives. Then he saw her. Lucy Chen stood apart from the other remaining children, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid, her mixed heritage written in the delicate features that marked her as different in a town where different was dangerous. She was small for 8 years old, wearing a clean but threadbare dress that had probably belonged to 3 other girls before her. But it was her eyes that stopped Sam cold. Old eyes in a young face, eyes that had seen too much disappointment to hope for anything different. Now, Lucy here is a special case, Thornton was saying to a middle-aged couple who'd approached the stage. Very well behaved, mind you, but her background. Well, it might not be suitable for every family situation. The couple exchanged a look and moved on without another word. Lucy's expression didn't change, but Sam saw her small hands clench into fists at her sides. 3 more families considered and rejected her with varying degrees of politeness. Each dismissal was like watching someone kick a wounded animal. Sam felt something twist in his chest, a anger he hadn't experienced in years. Do I hear any other bids for Lucy's sponsorship? Thornton called out. Remember, these children are all in need of winter homes, and Lucy is particularly capable with household tasks. Silence stretched across the room. Sam could hear the whispers, the uncomfortable shifting in chairs, the unspoken consensus that No respectable family would take in a half-Chinese girl. Going once, $50. The words left Sam's mouth before he'd consciously decided to speak. Every head in the room turned toward him, and he felt the weight of their stares like physical pressure. $50, he repeated, standing up. His legs felt unsteady, but his voice was clear. Thornton's eyebrows shot up. Mr. Holloway, are you certain? 60. The voice came from somewhere in the middle of the room. Sam turned to see Harold Brennan, owner of the feed store, avoiding his gaze. 75, Sam said without hesitation. Brennan considered for a moment, then shook his head and settled back in his chair. The room fell silent again. 75 going once, going twice. Sold to Samuel Holloway. Sam walked to the front of the room on unsteady legs, his heart pounding like he'd just roped a wild bronc. He handed Thornton the cash he'd scraped together from his emergency fund, money he'd been saving for winter feed. She's a good worker, Thornton said quietly as they signed the papers. Quiet. Won't give you any trouble. Sam nodded, unable to trust his voice. When the paperwork was complete, he found himself standing in front of Lucy Chen, this small stranger who was now his responsibility for the next 6 months. I'm Sam, he said awkwardly. Lucy. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but her eyes met his directly. There was wariness there, but also a flicker of something that might have been hope. Well, Lucy, Sam said, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. I guess we better head home. As they walked out of the town hall together, Sam, carrying Lucy's small suitcase, he wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or taken the first step toward saving it. Behind them, the murmur of disapproving voices followed them into the Montana night, where the stars hung brilliant and cold above a landscape that had forgotten how to forgive. Part 2. Stranger in the House. The drive back to the ranch passed. In silence, broken only by the rumble of Sam's pickup and the occasional creak of leather seats. Lucy sat pressed against the passenger door, her small hands folded in her lap, watching the moonlit landscape roll past with the careful attention of someone memorizing escape routes. Sam kept stealing glances at her, this stranger he'd impulsively claimed responsibility for. What the hell was he supposed to do with a child? He could barely manage his own meals, hadn't had a conversation longer than a few grunted words with another human being in months. Sarah had been the one who talked about children, who'd painted dreams of little feet running through the house and laughter echoing from the barn. Now here was Lucy, silent as a ghost, and Sam felt the weight of his complete inadequacy settling on his shoulders like a familiar burden. You hungry? He asked as they turned up the long drive to the house. No, sir. The formality in her voice made him wince. Just Sam. Don't need the sir. Yes, sir. Yes, Sam. The house loomed before them, dark except for the porch light Sam had left burning. It looked different somehow with Lucy beside him. Bigger, emptier, more obviously the home of a man who'd forgotten how to live instead of just exist. Inside, Sam flicked on lights and watched Lucy take in her new surroundings with the same careful observation she'd shown in the truck. The living room with its worn furniture and accumulated dust. The kitchen where dirty dishes sat in the sink because he never saw the point of washing them immediately when it was just him. The photographs on the mantelpiece, mostly of Sarah, a few of his parents, the ranch in better days. There's a room upstairs, Sam said, suddenly aware of how his voice echoed in the quiet house. It was. Well, it's empty now. You can use it. Lucy nodded and picked up her suitcase. It couldn't have weighed more than 10 pounds. Everything. This child owned in the world. Bathrooms at the end of the hall, Sam called after her as she climbed the stairs. Clean towels in the closet. He heard her footsteps overhead, the soft sound of a door closing. Then silence again, the kind that had been his constant companion for 5 years, but somehow felt different now. heavier, expectant. Sam poured himself a whiskey and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the foreclosure notice he'd left there that morning. 90 days, $37,000, and now a child to feed and care for, as if his problems weren't complicated enough already. The next morning, Sam woke before dawn as he always did, the habit of a lifetime too strong to break. He dressed quietly and headed downstairs, planning to check on the cattle before Lucy woke up. But when he reached the kitchen, he found her there already, fully dressed, sitting at the table with her hands folded. "Morning," Sam said, surprised. "You're up early." "I always get up early. At the orphanage, we had chores before breakfast." Sam nodded, unsure how to respond. He started coffee and rummaged through the refrigerator for something that might pass for breakfast. Eggs, a few slices of bacon that might not be too far gone. When had he last bought groceries? "I can cook," Lucy offered quietly. "That's all right. I got it." But as Sam cracked eggs into the pan, he could feel her watching him with the intensity of someone cataloging his methods. The eggs stuck to the pan. The bacon burned on one side while staying raw on the other. Coffee grounds floated in his cup because he'd forgotten to check the filter. "At the orphanage," Lucy said carefully, "we learned to grease the pan first and turn the bacon often." Sam looked at the mess he'd created, then at Lucy's diplomatic expression. "I guess I'm out of practice cooking for more than one. I could help, if you want." There was something in her voice, not eagerness exactly, but a cautious offering. Sam realized this might be her way of proving her worth, of ensuring she wouldn't be sent back. "All right," he said, stepping aside. "Show me what you know." Lucy slipped from her chair and approached the stove with the confident movements of someone who'd done this many times before. She cleaned the pan, re-greased it, started fresh eggs while salvaging what she could of the bacon. Her movements were economical, practiced. "Mrs. Henderson taught us," Lucy said as she worked. "She said every child should know how to take care of themselves." "Smart woman. She's the cook at the orphanage. She's nice, not like some of the others." Lucy's voice carried undertones of experiences she didn't elaborate on. They ate in companionable silence, and Sam had to admit the eggs were better than anything he'd managed in months. Afterward, Lucy automatically began clearing the table. "You don't have to," Sam started. "I like to help," Lucy said simply. "It makes me feel useful." The words hit Sam harder than he expected. When had he last felt useful? When had he last done anything that mattered? "Come on," he said impulsively. "Want to see the ranch?" Lucy's face lit up with the first genuine expression he'd seen from her, curiosity mixed with excitement. They walked out into the morning light, and Sam found himself seeing his land through her eyes. The barn that needed repairs but still stood solid and proud. The pastures that were brown now but would green up again when the rains returned. The mountains rising like guardians around the valley that had been home to 4 generations of Holloways. "It's beautiful," Lucy breathed, and Sam felt an unexpected swell of pride. They walked to the barn, where Sam's 3 horses nickered hopefully for breakfast. Lucy approached them without fear, her small hand extended for them to sniff. "This is Belle," Sam said, indicating the bay mare. "And that's Thunder." The gelding was gentle despite his name, chosen by Sam's father for his tendency to sleep through actual thunderstorms. And that ornery son of a gun is Rebel. Rebel was everything his name suggested, a pinto stallion with an attitude that had gotten worse in the years since Sarah's death. Sam had been meaning to sell him, but something always held him back. Maybe it was because Rebel's anger felt familiar. Lucy studied the horse with the same careful attention she'd shown everything else. "He's scared," she said quietly. "Scared?" "That horse doesn't know the meaning of the word." "Not scared like afraid," Lucy corrected. scared like hurt. Like he doesn't trust anyone because someone hurt him and he doesn't want it to happen again. Sam looked at her sharply. The kid couldn't be describing Rebel's history. There was no way she could know about the accident, about how the horse had been injured in the same storm that claimed Sarah's life, about the months of rehabilitation when Rebel had grown increasingly hostile toward human contact. But Lucy was already moving on, pointing to a calf that was limping slightly in the far pasture. That one's favoring his left front leg. Sam squinted where she pointed. I'll check on him later. Might be an abscess. I've seen it before. Mrs. Henderson had us help with the animals at the orphanage sometimes. The vet showed us things to look for. Sam found himself looking at Lucy with new eyes. This wasn't just some helpless child he'd taken in out of pity. She had skills, knowledge, observations that might actually be useful. Over the next few days, Lucy settled into ranch life with the adaptability of someone who'd learned to make the best of whatever situation she found herself in. She helped with feeding the chickens, assisted with simple repairs, and demonstrated an uncanny ability to spot problems Sam might have missed. But it was the small things that began to chip away at Sam's carefully constructed solitude. The way Lucy automatically set 2 places at the table instead of 1. How she'd pick wildflowers and put them in a jar on the windowsill, bringing a touch of life to the kitchen that had been missing for 5 years. The way she'd curl up in Sarah's chair in the evening, reading one of the few books she'd brought, her presence making the silence feel less like loneliness and more like peace. It was on the 4th night that Sam discovered Lucy sleeping on the floor beside the bed he'd given her, wrapped in a thin blanket with her suitcase as a pillow. Lucy. He knelt beside her, gently shaking her shoulder. What are you doing down? There? She woke instantly, the way children learn to when they've never been completely safe. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. The bed's for you. That's why it's in your room. Lucy sat up, her hair disheveled, her eyes wary in the dim light from the hallway. I know. It's too soft, too nice. I'm not used to. She didn't finish the sentence, but Sam understood. How many times had this child been given something good only to have it taken away? How many disappointments had taught her not to get comfortable, not to expect kindness to last? The bed's yours, Sam said firmly. For as long as you're here, no one's going to take it away. Lucy studied his face as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth. Finally, she nodded and climbed onto the mattress, still wearing her clothes. Good night, Lucy. Good night, Sam. As Sam returned to his own room, he realized something had shifted between them. The careful distance they'd both maintained was beginning to crack, revealing glimpses of the people they might become together. For the first time in 5 years, the ranch house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like the beginning of something he didn't dare name yet, but couldn't help hoping for. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd teach Lucy to ride. Sarah would have liked that. 2 weeks into their arrangement, Sam knew they couldn't avoid town any longer. The supplies were running low, and Lucy needed clothes that fit properly. The few things she'd brought were too small and worn thin from years of use. More importantly, she needed to be enrolled in school, though the thought of subjecting her to the scrutiny of the community made Sam's stomach clench with protective anger he hadn't felt since Sarah's death. We're going to town today, Sam announced over breakfast, watching Lucy's face carefully for her reaction. She nodded, but he caught the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her hands stilled on her fork. She was nervous too. Just for supplies, Sam added, and to get you signed up for school. Do I have to go to school? Law says you do. Besides, you're smart. Smarter than most kids I've known. You should be learning with others your age. Lucy's expression suggested she had little faith in the wisdom of spending time with children her age, but she didn't argue. The drive into town felt different with Lucy beside him. Sam found himself seeing the familiar streets through her eyes, the carefully maintained houses with their white picket fences and manicured lawns. the church steeple rising above the elm trees, the cluster of businesses that made up the town's modest commercial district. It looked peaceful, respectable, normal. But Sam knew what lay beneath the surface, the carefully maintained prejudices that governed who belonged and who didn't. Their first stop was Miller's General Store, where Sam had been buying supplies for 20 years. The bell above the door chimed their arrival, and conversations died mid-sentence as heads turned to stare. Sam felt Lucy move closer to his side, her small hand brushing against his arm. "Morning, Sam," called out Mrs. Patterson from behind the counter, her voice carrying forced cheerfulness. "And you must be Lucy. We heard you'd taken in one of the orphanage children." The way she said it made it sound like Sam had adopted a stray dog. "Lucy, yes, ma'am," Sam replied evenly. "We need some supplies." As they moved through the store, Sam was acutely aware of the whispered conversations that followed them. He caught fragments. Poor child. Inappropriate. What was he thinking? And felt his jaw tighten with each comment. Lucy said nothing, but her posture grew more rigid with each aisle they navigated. At the clothing section, Mrs. Patterson approached with an armload of dresses. "These might work for the child. They're second-hand but clean. We get donations from the church sometimes." "She has a name," Sam said quietly, "and she needs new clothes, not charity." Mrs. Patterson's smile faltered. "Of course. I just thought—" "Lucy," Sam said, turning to the girl, "pick out what you like. We'll get you properly outfitted." The small act of being allowed to choose seemed to straighten Lucy's shoulders. She selected 3 simple dresses, a warm coat, and sturdy shoes with the careful consideration of someone who'd learned to make things last. As Sam paid for their purchases, Frank Morrison entered the store with the confident stride of a man who owned everything he surveyed. His eyes found Lucy immediately, and his expression hardened. "Sam." Morrison's voice carried across the store, drawing more attention than Sam wanted. "I hear congratulations are in order. Taking in charity cases now?" "Just buying supplies, Frank." Morrison approached, his gaze fixed on Lucy with undisguised disapproval. "Interesting choice. Course, I suppose when a man's desperate, he'll try anything, even taking on responsibilities he's not equipped for." Sam stepped slightly in front of Lucy, his protective instincts flaring. "Lucy's doing just fine." "Is she?" Morrison's smile was cold. 8-year-old girl living alone with a man who's been... He paused meaningfully. "Well, let's just say your state of mind has been a concern for some time. Drinking, isolation, inability to maintain your property. Makes one wonder if you're really the best guardian for an impressionable child." The store had gone completely silent. Sam felt Lucy's eyes on him, waiting to see how he'd respond to the public challenge. "Lucy's well cared for," Sam said, his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. "Anyone with eyes can see that. Perhaps, but appearances can be deceiving. The county takes child welfare seriously, Sam. Very seriously." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Morrison smiled once more and left, the bell chiming his departure with false cheerfulness. "Don't mind him," Mrs. Patterson said quickly, as if trying to repair the damage. "Frank's always been particular about things." Sam gathered their packages without responding. As they reached the door, Lucy spoke for the first time since entering the store. "He doesn't like me." "He doesn't like anyone who threatens his sense of how things should be," Sam replied. "That's his problem, not yours." Their next stop was the schoolhouse, a modest building that had served the community's children for 40 years. Margaret O'Brien was alone in her classroom, preparing lessons for the next day. She was younger than Sam had expected, maybe 35, with intelligent eyes and the kind of determined expression that suggested she didn't back down easily. "Mr. Holloway," she said, rising from her desk, "and you must be Lucy. I've been hoping you'd come by." Unlike the reactions at the store, Miss O'Brien's welcome felt genuine. She knelt to Lucy's eye level, studying her face with professional interest. "How far along are you in your studies, Lucy?" "I can read most anything," Lucy said quietly. "And I know arithmetic through long division. Some geography and history, too." Miss O'Brien's eyebrows rose. "Most anything? Can you show me?" Lucy looked to Sam for permission, and he nodded. Miss O'Brien handed her a book from the shelf, something that looked advanced for a third grader. Lucy read a passage aloud with perfect fluency and clear comprehension. "My goodness," Miss O'Brien murmured. "You're reading at a 7th grade level at least." "The ladies at the orphanage taught us. They said education was the only thing no one could take away." "Wise ladies." Miss O'Brien turned to Sam. "She'll need to be in my class officially, but frankly, she's already beyond most of my students. We'll need to find ways to challenge her." As they completed the enrollment paperwork, other parents began arriving to collect their children. Sam watched their reactions when they spotted Lucy, some curious, others openly disapproving. One woman actually pulled her daughter closer, as if Lucy might be contagious. "Miss O'Brien," said Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, "surely you're not planning to put that child in with our children." "That child has a name, Mrs. Henderson. Lucy will be joining my class on Monday." "But her background, is it appropriate?" Miss O'Brien straightened to her full height, and Sam saw steel beneath her pleasant demeanor. "Lucy is an 8-year-old girl who needs an education. That's all the background that matters in my classroom." Mrs. Henderson's mouth tightened, but she didn't argue further. As she left with her daughter, Sam heard her mutter something about speaking to the school board. "Don't worry about her," Miss O'Brien said quietly. "The school board knows we need every student we can get. Lucy stays." Their final stop was the church, where Father Miguel Santos was tending the small garden beside the rectory. The priest was a slight man with graying hair and kind eyes, younger than Sam had expected when he'd heard about the Mexican priest who'd been assigned to their parish 2 years ago. "Sam Holloway," Father Miguel said, straightening and wiping his hands on his trousers. "I've been hoping to meet you both." The priest's welcome was warm and uncomplicated. He spoke to Lucy in both English and Spanish, delighting her when she shyly responded in the few words she knew. When he learned of her mixed heritage, his face lit up with understanding. "My grandmother was Chinese," he said, "from Guangzhou. She married my grandfather when he was working the railroads. Beautiful woman, though she had to endure much ignorance." Lucy's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" She used to say that God made different kinds of flowers not to see which was best, but to make the garden more beautiful. Father Miguel smiled. "I think she would have liked you very much." As they prepared to leave, Father Miguel placed a gentle hand on Sam's shoulder. "The path ahead may not be easy," he said quietly, "but some journeys are worth the struggle." On the drive home, Lucy was unusually quiet, processing everything they'd encountered. Finally, she spoke. "Some people don't like me. Some people don't like anything that's different from what they expect," Sam replied. "That says more about them than it does about you. But Mr. Morrison, he could make trouble. Couldn't." "He?" Sam's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The kid was perceptive, probably too perceptive for her own good. "Maybe, but we've got people on our side too. Miss O'Brien, Father Miguel. They see you for who you really are." "What am I?" The question caught Sam off guard. He glanced at Lucy, saw the genuine uncertainty in her expression, and realized she was asking something much deeper than she probably understood. "You're smart and kind and braver than most adults I know," he said finally. "You're exactly the kind of person this world needs more of." Lucy considered this in silence, then nodded slowly. "And you? Do you see me for who I really am?" Sam felt something shift in his chest, A recognition that had been building for 2 weeks without him acknowledging it. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think I do." As they turned up the ranch road, Sam realized the day had changed something fundamental between them. They'd faced the world together and survived it. More than that, they'd found allies and discovered that their bond could withstand external pressure. But he also understood now that the battle for Lucy's future was just beginning, and Frank Morrison had made it clear that the stakes were higher than Sam had imagined. For the first time since Sarah's death, Sam found himself willing to fight. For something, not just the ranch, but for the girl beside him who'd somehow become more important than his own fears. October arrived with the kind of crisp mornings that made the mountains look close enough to touch, and turned the aspen leaves to shimmering gold. Sam found himself waking earlier than usual, not from the restless insomnia that had plagued him for years, but from genuine eagerness to start the day. The change had everything to do with the small figure who'd taken to joining him for morning coffee, sitting quietly at the kitchen table while they planned the day's work. "Rebel's been pacing in his stall again," Lucy observed, warming her, hands around her mug of hot chocolate, a luxury Sam had started keeping in the house without quite admitting why. Sam glanced toward the barn, where he could indeed see the pinto stallion moving restlessly. He always gets antsy when the weather changes. Maybe he needs more exercise. At the orphanage, when kids got restless, Mrs. Henderson would find them something useful to do. Made everyone happier. The simple observation hit Sam with unexpected force. When had he stopped riding Rebel? When had he stopped doing half the things that had once brought him joy? Sarah's death had turned everything into mere survival, but Lucy's presence was slowly reminding him that there was a difference between existing and living. "You might be onto something," Sam said. "Question is, who's brave enough to ride him?" Lucy's eyes lit up with interest, and Sam quickly held up a hand. "Not you. Not yet, anyway. Rebel's got too much spirit for someone. Just learning." "I'm not just learning," Lucy protested. "I've been riding Belle every day for 2 weeks." It was true. Sam had started Lucy on the gentle bay mare, expecting to spend weeks teaching her basic balance and control. Instead, Lucy had taken to riding with the natural ease of someone born to it. Within days, she was helping him check on cattle in the far pastures, her small form perfectly balanced in the saddle as Belle picked her way across uneven ground. "Belle's a saint," Sam said. "Rebel's—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Rebel needs someone he trusts completely. Someone who won't give up on him when he gets difficult." Lucy studied Sam's face with the perceptive intensity that still caught him off guard. "Like you?" The words hung between them, carrying implications Sam wasn't ready to examine too closely. Instead, he stood and pulled his hat from the peg by the door. "Come on, let's go see if that horse of mine remembers how to behave." They walked to the barn together, their breath visible in the crisp air. Rebel snorted and stamped when Sam approached his stall, ears pinned back in warning. But as Sam spoke in low, steady tones, the horse gradually settled, allowing himself to be saddled for the first time in months. "Easy, boy," Sam murmured, running his hands along Rebel's neck. "Just you and me, like old times." Lucy watched from a safe distance as Sam led Rebel into the paddock. The horse danced sideways, testing boundaries, but Sam's steady hand and calm voice gradually brought him under control. When Sam finally swung into the saddle, Rebel tensed for a moment before settling into a smooth trot around the enclosure. "He's beautiful," Lucy breathed, her eyes following horse and rider with obvious longing. Sam felt something loosen in his chest as he and Rebel found their rhythm again. This was what he'd been missing. Not just the physical act of riding, but the partnership, the trust between horse and rider that required both to be fully present. Sarah had always said that watching Sam ride was like watching him come alive. After 20 minutes, Sam dismounted and led Rebel back to Lucy. "Want to try leading him?" Lucy's face lit up with delight. Under Sam's careful supervision, she took the lead rope and walked Rebel around the paddock. The horse, still energized from his ride, towered over her small frame, but Lucy showed no fear. When Rebel tossed his head playfully, she laughed, a sound that sent warmth spreading through Sam's chest. "He likes you," Sam observed. "How can you tell? See how his ears are forward? And he's not pulling against the rope. He's listening. To you." Lucy beamed with pride. "Maybe someday I could ride him." "Maybe," Sam said carefully. "When you're older. When you've had more practice." The word older reminded them both of the temporary nature of their arrangement, casting a shadow over the moment. Lucy's smile faded slightly, and she focused intently on leading Rebel back to his stall. Over the following days, their morning rides became a ritual. Sam would saddle Belle for Lucy and Thunder for himself, and they'd ride out to check on the cattle or inspect fence lines that needed repair. Lucy proved to have an excellent eye for spotting problems, a broken post here, a weak section of wire there, and her suggestions for fixes often showed a practical intelligence that impressed Sam. "We could run a temporary line here until spring," she suggested one morning, pointing to a section where the fence had been damaged by a fallen tree. "Then do the permanent repair when the ground's not so hard." Sam studied the damaged area, mentally calculating materials and labor. "That'd work. Save us time and money." Papa used to say that sometimes the best solution is the one that gets you through today so you can worry about tomorrow when it comes. It was the first time. Lucy had mentioned her father without prompting, and Sam felt the significance of the moment. He'd learned to read her moods, to recognize when she was ready to share pieces of her past. "Sounds like a wise man," Sam said quietly. He was. Mama, too, though she worried more. Papa would say she worried enough for 3 people. Lucy's voice grew soft with memory. They met when he was working on the railroad. Mama's family didn't approve, but she said love was more important than approval. Sam thought of Sarah, of how his own parents had initially worried about her, a town girl marrying a rancher. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones you have to fight for. Lucy glanced at him sideways. "Is that why you bid on me? Because you like fighting for things?" The question caught Sam unprepared. He'd been asking himself the same thing for weeks, trying to understand the impulse that had driven him to stand up in that town hall. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I just couldn't stand watching them dismiss you like you didn't matter." "Do I matter?" The quiet question nearly broke Sam's heart. He pulled Thunder to a stop and waited for Lucy to do the same with Belle. "You matter," he said firmly. "You matter to me and to Miss O'Brien and to Father Miguel. You matter to Belle here, and probably to Rebel too, though he's too proud to admit it." Lucy's eyes were bright with unshed tears. For how long? Sam felt the weight of the question, the fear behind it. How many times had this child been told she mattered, only to be disappointed? How many promises had been broken? How many temporary homes had become just another loss? "I don't know what's going to happen come spring," Sam said carefully. "But right now, today, you matter, and nothing's going to change that." It wasn't enough. Sam could see that in Lucy's expression, but it was all he could honestly offer. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain and fraught with complications he didn't fully understand yet. As October progressed, their partnership deepened through shared work. When a section of the barn roof began leaking, Lucy insisted on helping with repairs, proving surprisingly adept with tools despite her small size. "Hand me that hammer," Sam called from his perch on the ladder. Lucy passed it up, then climbed onto the roof beside him with the fearless agility of childhood. "Mrs. Henderson used to say idle hands were the devil's workshop. We all learned to fix things." "This is dangerous work," Sam warned, though he was impressed by her balance and confidence. Everything's dangerous if you do it wrong, but you're teaching me to do it right. They worked in companionable silence for a while, replacing damaged shingles and ceiling gaps. Lucy's presence made the work feel less like drudgery and more like purpose. When she handed him exactly the right tool without being asked or anticipated, his next need, Sam began to understand how much he'd missed having a true partner. "Tell me about her," Lucy said suddenly. Sam nearly dropped his hammer. "Who?" "Your wife, Sarah. You said her name that night when you were sick, but you never talk about her." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sam's hands stilled on the shingle he was positioning. For 5 years, Sarah's name had been too painful to speak aloud, but somehow, with Lucy beside him in the afternoon sun, it felt possible. "She was light," Sam said finally. "That's the best way I can describe her. When she walked into a room, everything got brighter. She could make me laugh when I was being too serious, make me think when I was being too stubborn." "What did she look like?" "Pretty, not fancy pretty, but real pretty. Brown hair, green eyes, freckles across her nose that she hated, but I loved." Sam smiled despite himself. "She grew up in town, didn't know the first thing about ranch life when we married, but she learned. God, how she learned." "Did she want children?" The question hit like a physical blow. Sam was quiet for so long that Lucy looked up at him with concern. "She did," Sam said finally. "We tried for years. Finally happened, just before." He couldn't finish the sentence. Lucy's small hand found his arm. "I'm sorry." "Car accident, ice storm. She was coming back from the doctor. Wanted to surprise me with the news." Sam's voice was barely above a whisper. "Lost them both in one night." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of shared grief settling between them. Finally, Lucy spoke. "Mama used to say that the people we love never really leave us. They just love us from somewhere else." Sam looked at this small girl, who'd somehow become wise beyond her years through loss and resilience. "Your mama sounds like she was pretty smart, too." She was. She and Papa both. They loved each other so much, even when other people said they shouldn't. When they died, I thought. I thought maybe love wasn't worth it if it just ended up hurting so much. "What do you think now?" Lucy considered the question seriously. "I think maybe the hurt means it was real, and real is better than nothing, even if it doesn't last forever." That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Sam found himself telling Lucy stories about Sarah. Her attempts to cook for the ranch hands that ended in near disasters. Her determination to learn to ride, despite being terrified of horses, the way she'd decorated the house for Christmas like they were expecting royalty. Lucy listened with the careful attention of someone storing away precious details, occasionally asking questions that showed she understood the significance of what Sam was sharing. "She would have liked you," Sam said as Lucy prepared to head upstairs to bed. "How do you know?" "Because she had a soft spot for strays and lost causes. And because you're brave and kind, which were the two things she valued most." Lucy paused at the bottom of the stairs. "Sam?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you bid on me that night." "Me too, kid. Me too." But later, as Sam sat alone by the dying fire, he couldn't shake the anxiety that had been building for weeks. Their arrangement was supposed to be temporary, just for the winter. Months. Come spring, Lucy was expected to return to the orphanage. The thought of losing her now felt almost as devastating as losing Sarah had been. The difference was that this time, he might have some choice in the matter. The question was whether he had the courage to fight for what he was beginning to realize he couldn't live without. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the promise of winter and the reminder that time was running out. Sam stared into the fire and wondered what it would take to make a temporary arrangement permanent, and whether a broken-down rancher and an unwanted little girl could possibly build something strong enough to survive the storm that was coming. The blizzard arrived 3 weeks before Thanksgiving with the fury of something personal. Sam had seen the signs in the cattle's behavior, the way they clustered together near the barn, and in the oppressive stillness that settled over the mountains, like a held breath. But even his 45 years of Montana winters hadn't prepared him for the ferocity of what the weather brought down on them. It started as snow, innocent enough, fat flakes drifting past the kitchen window where Lucy sat doing her lessons. Miss O'Brien had sent work home when the first warnings came through on the radio, knowing that many of her rural students might be trapped for days. "Looks like it's going to be a big one," Sam said, checking the barometer for the 3rd time in an hour. Lucy looked up from her arithmetic book. "How big?" "Big enough that we might not see town for a while." By evening, the innocent snow had transformed into a howling beast that rattled the windows and sent drifts climbing toward the porch roof. Sam made trip after trip to the barn, battling wind that threatened to knock him flat, ensuring the animals had enough feed and water to last. On his final journey, he nearly missed the door entirely, the world beyond the barn having disappeared into a wall of white. "That's it," he announced, stamping snow off his boots. "We're staying put until this blows over." Lucy helped him move supplies from the pantry to the kitchen. Canned goods, dried beans, flour, coffee. Their fresh food would last maybe 3 days. After that, they'd be living on preserves and whatever Sam had managed to put up during the autumn. "Mrs. Henderson always said a good cook could make a feast from scraps," Lucy said, surveying their assembled provisions with the serious consideration of a general planning strategy. "Good thing I've got a good cook then," Sam replied, and was rewarded with one of Lucy's rare, unguarded smiles. The first night passed peacefully enough. They played cards by lamplight after Lucy finished her schoolwork, and Sam told stories about previous winters, the year the snow buried the barn to its roof, the time his grandfather had to tunnel to reach the cattle. Lucy listened with fascination, filing away each detail like she was building a manual for survival. But by the 2nd day, it became clear this wasn't an ordinary storm. The wind never stopped, a constant shriek that made the house feel like it was under siege. The temperature dropped until even with the fires going constantly, frost formed on the inside of the windows. "We need to conserve fuel," Sam said, studying their dwindling pile of firewood. "Close off the upstairs. Move your things down to the living room." Lucy nodded without complaint, gathering her few belongings. Sam watched her make a nest of blankets near the fireplace with the practical efficiency of someone who'd learned to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. When had this become natural to her? When had his house become her home? By the 3rd day, their situation grew more serious. The power had been out since the first night, and Sam's battery radio crackled, with warnings about the worst storm in 20 years. More concerning, their food was running lower than he'd anticipated. Lucy was eating less than usual, he noticed, claiming she wasn't hungry when he knew she must be. "We're partners in this," Sam said firmly when he caught her giving him the larger portion of their meager dinner. "Partners share equally. Partners also make sure the stronger one stays strong to take care of both," Lucy replied with logic that sounded far too old for her 8 years. On the 4th morning, Sam made a mistake that nearly cost them everything. Checking on the gauze animals despite Lucy's protests that the storm was too dangerous, he slipped on ice hidden beneath the snow and felt his left leg twist with a sickening pop. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, dropping him to his knees in the snow that was already past his waist. Lucy found him there 20 minutes later, having grown worried when he didn't return. She was bundled in layers of coats that made her look like a small, determined snowman. "Sam!" She fought through the drifts to reach him, her small hands surprisingly strong as she helped him to his feet. "What happened?" "Twisted my knee, maybe worse." Sam leaned heavily on her as they made their way back to the house, each step sending fire up his leg. Stupid, careless mistake. Inside, Lucy helped him to the couch and brought wet towels to clean the scrapes on his hands. Her movements were calm and efficient, but Sam could see the fear in her eyes. "How bad is it?" she asked. Sam tried to bend the knee and bit back a groan. "Bad enough. Going to be hard to get around for a while." Lucy disappeared upstairs and returned with strips torn from an old sheet. "We need to wrap it tight. Mrs. Henderson showed us how when Tommy broke his wrist." As Lucy carefully bandaged his knee, Sam felt a reversal of roles that left him uncomfortable. He was supposed to be taking care of her, not the other way around. But Lucy seemed to grow more capable with each challenge, as if adversity was her natural element. "The animals," Sam started. "I can do it," Lucy said firmly. "You tell me what needs doing, and I'll do it." "Lucy, you're 8 years old. You can't." "I can and I will." Her voice carried a determination that reminded Sam forcibly of Sarah. "We're partners, remember? Partners help each other." For the next 2 days, Lucy became Sam's legs. She fought her way to the barn through snow that came up to her chest, fed and watered the animals, checked on the cattle huddled in the shelter of the windbreak. Each time she returned, her cheeks were bright red with cold, but her reports were thorough and accurate. 3 of the yearlings made it to the South Pasture Shelter, she reported after one expedition. "But I can't see the others. The snow's too deep." Sam felt helpless rage at his own weakness. Those cattle were scattered across hundreds of acres, and if they were caught in the open when the temperature dropped tonight. "There's nothing we can do," he said, though the words tasted like defeat. "Not until this storm passes." Lucy studied his face with that perceptive intensity that sometimes made Sam feel like she could read his thoughts. "What would you do if you could walk?" "Try to find them. Drive them to shelter before nightfall." "Then that's what we'll do." "Lucy, no, it's too dangerous." But she was already pulling on her layers of coats, her jaw set with stubborn determination. "You can ride thunder, even with a bad leg. I'll take Belle. We'll search together." Sam wanted to refuse, to lock her in the house if necessary. But he could see the cattle from the window, dark shapes barely visible through the blowing snow, and he knew they'd die if left exposed. More than that, he recognized something in Lucy's expression, the same fierce protectiveness he felt for her. "All right," he said finally, "but we stay together. No matter what happens, we don't get separated." Riding with an injured leg was agony, but Sam gritted his teeth and followed Lucy into the storm. She rode ahead on Belle, the mare's bulk breaking trail through the snow, while Sam urged Thunder to follow. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked them both from their saddles, and the cold cut through their heaviest clothes like they were wearing paper. They found the missing cattle bunched together in a grove of cottonwoods, the trees providing minimal shelter from the storm. 7 head, including a pregnant cow that looked close to calving. They were suffering, but alive. "How do we move them?" Lucy shouted over the wind. Sam studied the terrain, calculating distances and obstacles. The main shelter was 1/2 a mile away, but there was a closer option, an old line shack his grandfather had built in a protected draw. "Follow me," he called back, "and stay close." Moving cattle in a blizzard was like herding ghosts. The animals were reluctant to leave even. Poor shelter, and the snow made every step treacherous. But Lucy proved to have an intuitive understanding of cattle behavior, positioning Belle to block escape routes while Sam pushed the herd forward. It took them 2 hours to move 7 cattle 1/2 a mile. By the time they reached the line shack, both riders and animals were exhausted. But the old building was solid, and there was hay stored inside from the previous summer. "They'll be safe here," Sam said, slumping in his saddle as relief flooded through him. Lucy nodded, too tired to speak. The ride back to the house passed. in a blur of cold and pain. But when they finally reached the barn, Sam felt a pride that had nothing to do with the cattle they'd saved. "You were incredible out there," he told Lucy as they rubbed down the horses. "I couldn't have done it without you." Lucy's smile was tired but radiant. "We make a good team." That night, Sam's injury caught up with him. The pain in his knee, combined with exhaustion and exposure, left him fevered and delirious. Lucy bathed his forehead with cool cloths and forced him to drink water, her small hands gentle and sure. In his delirium, Sam found himself calling for Sarah, then for Lucy when he couldn't find his wife. At one point, he gripped Lucy's hand with desperate strength. "Don't leave," he whispered. "Please don't leave me alone again." "I won't," Lucy promised, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Later, when the fever broke and Sam drifted toward real sleep, he mumbled words that made Lucy's heart race with hope and terror. "Love you too, daughter. Love you so much." Lucy sat beside him through the night, watching his breathing and wondering if he'd remember what he'd said, wondering if he'd meant it, wondering what would happen when the storm finally passed and the outside world came calling again. On the 7th day, the wind finally died. Sam woke to an unnatural silence and the sound of Lucy moving around the kitchen. His fever had broken, and though his knee still ached, his head was clear for the first time in days. "Storm's over," Lucy announced, bringing him coffee and toast. "I can see the mountains again." Sam struggled to the window and looked out at a transformed landscape. Snow had drifted against the house to the second-story windows, and the familiar shapes of barn and fences were buried under smooth white curves. It would take days to dig out. "We made it," he said, surprised by how much relief he felt. "We did," Lucy agreed. Then, more quietly, "Sam, last night when you were sick, did you mean what you said?" Sam looked at her carefully, seeing the hope and fear warring in her expression. He remembered fragments, fevered dreams of loss and finding, of Sarah and Lucy somehow connected in his confused mind. "What did I say?" Lucy's courage seemed to falter. "Nothing. It doesn't matter." But it did matter. Sam could see that. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he had a feeling he knew exactly what he'd said, fever or no fever. Before he could pursue it further, they heard the distant sound of an engine. Through the window, Sam could see a snowplow working its way up the road, followed by a familiar black sedan. "Frank Morrison," Sam said grimly. Lucy pressed close to the window, watching the banker's car navigate the cleared road. "What does he want?" "Nothing good," Sam replied, reaching for his coat. "But whatever it is, we face it together." As they watched Morrison's car pull into their yard, Sam realized that the storm had done more than test their survival skills. It had welded them into something unbreakable, a family forged in shared hardship and mutual trust. Whatever Morrison wanted, whatever threats he brought, Sam knew with absolute certainty that he would not let anyone separate him from the daughter who had saved his life in more ways than she could possibly know. The battle for their future was about to begin, but they would face it as they had faced the storm, together. Spring came to the Holloway ranch like a benediction, melting away the last of winter's grip with warm winds that carried the scent of new grass and possibility. Sam stood on his porch in the early April sunshine, watching Lucy work with the sheep they'd acquired just after the worst of the winter had passed. Her suggestion to diversify had seemed risky at the time. Sheep were foreign to cattle country, and the neighbors had been skeptical at best. But now, watching the small flock graze contentedly in the south pasture while Lucy moved among them with confident authority, Sam had to admit the kid had been right again. "Sheep are smarter than people give them credit for," Lucy had argued during one of their long winter evenings. "And they don't need as much grass as cattle. We could run 30 head on that pasture that's too rough for the cows." Sam had initially dismissed the idea, but as their feed bills mounted and the cattle market remained depressed, Lucy's suggestion began to make financial sense. When old Pete mentioned that a rancher over in Billings was selling his flock cheap, Sam had made the drive and come home with 25 ewes and a ram that Lucy had immediately named Woolworth, much to Sam's amusement. The sheep had thrived under Lucy's care, and early lambing season had brought 23 healthy babies that would bring good money at market. More importantly, the wool sales would provide steady income throughout the year, money that might just be enough to keep Frank Morrison at bay. "The ewes are ready to move to the upper pasture," Lucy called out, her voice carrying easily across the warming air. She'd grown taller over the winter, Sam noticed, and her face had lost some of its careful wariness, replaced by the confidence of someone who knew her worth and place in the world. "Tomorrow," Sam replied, "after we finish the cattle roundup." The spring roundup was scheduled to begin in 3 days, with neighboring ranchers pooling their efforts as they had for generations. Sam had been dreading it, not the work, which he'd done countless times before, but the scrutiny. It would be the first time many of his neighbors had seen him and Lucy together since the autumn, and he knew tongues would wag about the arrangement that had lasted far longer than anyone expected. Lucy seemed to sense his thoughts. "Will they try to make trouble?" she asked, approaching the porch with that direct way she had of addressing difficult subjects. "Some might, but you've proven yourself, Lucy. Anyone with eyes can see how much you've accomplished here." It was true. Beyond the successful sheep venture, Lucy's influence on the ranch had been transformative. She'd reorganized the barn to improve efficiency, suggested modifications to the feeding system that had reduced waste, and somehow managed to turn Sam's chaotic record-keeping into a comprehensible system that actually showed they were slowly climbing out of debt. "Miss O'Brien says I'm ready for high school mathematics," Lucy said, settling on the porch steps beside him. "She thinks I could take correspondence courses, maybe even go to college someday." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and Sam felt a corresponding swell of paternal satisfaction. Sarah would have liked that. She always said education was the key to everything. Lucy was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had been hovering between them for weeks. "Sam, what happens when the sponsorship period officially ends?" Sam's stomach clenched. The winter sponsorship was supposed to conclude at the end of March, but with the brutal weather extending well into April, no one had come to collect Lucy. Billy Thornton had sent a letter mentioning the extension, but Sam knew it was only a matter of time before the orphanage director made his appearance. "I don't know," Sam said honestly, "but I know I'm not ready to let you go." The words hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross completely. Lucy's eyes brightened with hope, but Sam could see the fear there too, the learned wariness of a child who'd been disappointed too many times. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching. Sam recognized old Pete's truck immediately, but the second vehicle made his jaw tighten, Frank Morrison's black sedan, followed by what looked like the county sheriff's patrol car. "Trouble," Sam muttered, standing up. Lucy moved instinctively closer to his side as the vehicles pulled into the yard. Pete emerged from his truck with a grim expression, while Morrison climbed out of his sedan wearing the satisfied smile of a man who held all the cards. Sheriff Davies, a fair-minded man in his 50s, looked uncomfortable as he joined the group, approaching the house. "Sam, Lucy?" Pete nodded, his weathered face apologetic. "Sorry about this." "Mr. Holloway," Morrison began without preamble, "I'm here on official business. The bank's board has reviewed your account, and given the irregular circumstances of your domestic arrangement, we've decided to accelerate our timeline for debt collection." Sam felt Lucy tense beside him. "What does that mean?" Morrison pulled out a manila folder. "It means you have 30 days to bring your account current. Full payment of all outstanding debts plus accrued interest. $37,412. The number hit Sam like a physical blow. Even with the sheep sales and improved cattle prices, he was still months away from having that kind of money. "You said I had until autumn," Sam protested. "That was before we became aware of the questionable nature of your guardianship situation." Morrison's smile was cold. "The bank can't be associated with arrangements that might reflect poorly on our community standing." Sheriff Davies stepped forward, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Sam, I'm here because there's been some concern about the girl's welfare. Nothing official, you understand, but Morrison here seems to think—" "I think," Morrison interrupted, "that a single man living alone with an unrelated minor girl creates an inappropriate situation that reflects poorly on our community values. The longer this arrangement continues, the more questions arise about Mr. Holloway's motivations and the child's safety." Sam felt rage building in his chest, but Lucy's small hand found his arm, steadying him. "Sheriff, you're welcome to inspect our home anytime. You'll find Lucy well cared for, healthy, and happy." "I can see that," Davies said quickly. "The girl looks fine, Sam. But Morrison's raised some legal questions about the sponsorship arrangement that I'm not qualified to address." Morrison's smile widened. "Which brings me to the other matter." He pulled out another set of papers. "Mr. Thornton will be arriving tomorrow to reclaim Lucy. The winter sponsorship period ended 2 weeks ago, and the county has determined that the arrangement should conclude immediately." Lucy made a small sound, not quite a gasp, but close. Sam felt her hand tighten on his arm. "We've had this conversation, Frank," Sam said evenly. "Lucy's staying." "Actually, Mr. Holloway, that's not your decision to make. You have no legal claim to the child. The sponsorship was always intended to be temporary, and that temporary period is now over." Sam felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. All winter, he'd told himself that somehow they'd find a way to make the arrangement permanent. But now, faced with the legal reality, he realized how tenuous their situation truly was. "What would it take?" Sam asked quietly. "To make it permanent?" Morrison's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Adoption? Mr. Holloway, surely you can't be serious. A single man, financially unstable, with no family connections to speak of. The county would never approve such an arrangement, particularly given the child's background." The last word dripped with disdain, and Sam felt his control snap. "Her background? You mean the fact that she's more intelligent, capable, and decent than half the adults in this county?" "I mean," Morrison said coldly, "that she's a half-breed. Orphan with no prospects and no place in respectable society. Your attachment to her is unseemly." The silence that followed was electric. Sheriff Davies shifted uncomfortably, while Pete's face darkened with anger. But it was Lucy who spoke, her voice steady and clear. "Mr. Morrison," she said, looking directly at the banker, "my parents taught me that a person's worth isn't determined by their bloodline or their bank account. It's determined by how they treat others and what they contribute to the world. By that measure, I'd say I belong here more than you do." Morrison's face flushed red. "How dare you?" "The girl's right," Pete interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of his 70 years. "Lucy's done more good for this ranch and this community in 6 months than you've done in your entire life, Frank." Davies nodded slowly. "Sam, the law's the law, but if you want to pursue adoption, you'd need to file papers with the county court. Judge Hartley would make the final decision." Sam felt a spark of hope. Judge Hartley was known to be fair-minded, more concerned with children's welfare than social conventions. "And in the meantime?" Sam asked. "In the meantime," Morrison said smoothly, "the child returns to the orphanage where she belongs. Mr. Thornton will collect her tomorrow morning." "No." The word came out more forcefully than Sam intended. "I'll file for temporary custody, emergency petition." Davies looked uncertain. Sam, that's complicated. You'd need grounds, legal representation. He'll have both, said a new voice from behind them. They turned to see Margaret O'Brien approaching from the direction of the road, where her small car was parked. She carried a briefcase and wore the determined expression Sam had seen her use when facing down difficult parents. Miss O'Brien, Morrison said, with poorly concealed annoyance, this is a private matter. Actually, as Lucy's teacher and as someone with a master's degree in education law, I'd say this very much concerns me. Margaret set down her briefcase and pulled out a folder. I've been expecting this conversation, Mr. Morrison, which is why I took the liberty of researching the relevant statutes. She handed papers to Sheriff Davies. Montana law allows for emergency custody petitions in cases where a child's welfare would be endangered by removal from their current placement. Given Lucy's academic progress, emotional stability, and obvious well-being in Mr. Holloway's care, I believe we have strong grounds for such a petition. Morrison's confidence seemed to waver slightly. You can't prove endangerment. Can't I? Margaret's smile was sharp. Lucy has advanced 2 grade levels in 6 months, shows no signs of psychological distress, and has formed a healthy attachment to her guardian. Removing her now would constitute emotional trauma that could affect her development for years to come. Any family court judge would recognize that. Sam felt hope blooming in his chest. You'd testify to that? I'd be delighted to. And I suspect Father Miguel, Doc Hartwell, and several others would as well. Margaret turned to Morrison. The question is whether you really want this to become a public legal battle. Because, if it does, people might start asking why the bank president is so determined to separate a man from the child he's obviously devoted to. Morrison's face had gone pale. This isn't over, he said finally. The bank still expects payment in 30 days, regardless of the custody situation. Then we'll deal with that when the time comes, Sam replied. As the group dispersed, Morrison shot one last venomous look at Lucy. You think you've won something here, girl, but mark my words, you don't belong in this community, and eventually everyone will see that. Lucy met his gaze steadily. Maybe. I don't belong in your version of this community, Mr. Morrison. But I belong in the one that's being built by people who judge others by their character instead of their bloodline. After Morrison and Davies left, Margaret, Pete, and Sam sat on the porch while Lucy went to check on the sheep, giving the adults space to talk, but staying close enough to feel protected. How strong is our legal position, really? Sam asked. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Stronger than Morrison thinks, but not as strong as I'd like. The sponsorship arrangement was always meant to be temporary, and there's no precedent for conversion to permanent custody in this county. We're essentially asking the court to create new legal ground. What are our chances? Honestly? Maybe 50-50. Judge Hartley is fair, but he's also conservative. He'll want to see compelling evidence that Lucy's best interests are served by staying with you rather than returning to the orphanage. Pete leaned forward. What about the financial situation? Frank's demand for immediate payment? Sam's shoulders sagged. I don't have $37,000. Even with the sheep income and better cattle prices, I'm still short by at least $15,000. What if you had help? Pete asked quietly. Sam looked at his old friend suspiciously. Pete, you can't. Not me alone. But there are others who've seen what Lucy's done for you, how you've both thrived together. Neighbors who remember when you were drowning in grief and self-pity, who've watched you come back to life because of that little girl. I can't take charity. It wouldn't be charity, Margaret interjected. It would be an investment. In you, in Lucy, in the kind of community we want to build here. As if summoned by their conversation, Lucy appeared around the corner of the house, leading one of the ewes on a makeshift halter. Daisy's limping, she announced. I think she's got something stuck in her hoof. Sam stood immediately, his protective instincts engaging. "Let's take a look." As they worked together to examine and treat the sheep's injured foot, Sam was struck again by how naturally they functioned as a team. Lucy held the animal steady while Sam removed a small stone from between the toes, then applied antiseptic with practiced efficiency. "She'll be fine," Sam announced. "Good eye catching that?" Lucy beamed with pride, and Sam felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came whenever he thought about losing her. That evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Lucy voiced the question that had been hanging between them all day. "Do you really think we can stay together?" Sam looked at this remarkable child who'd somehow become the center of his universe. "I'm going to fight for you, Lucy. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm not giving up. Even if it costs you the ranch?" The question cut to the heart of Sam's dilemma. The ranch was his family's legacy, the foundation of everything he'd built his identity around. But looking at Lucy's hopeful, frightened face, he realized the answer was surprisingly simple. "The ranch is just land and buildings," he said finally. "You're family, and family is worth any sacrifice." Lucy's eyes filled with tears, and she launched herself into his arms with the fierce desperation of someone who'd been holding back too long. "I love you too, Sam," she whispered against his shoulder. "I want to stay forever." As Sam held her, feeling her small form shake with suppressed emotion, he made a silent vow. Whatever legal battles lay ahead, whatever financial sacrifices were required, whatever social pressure they had to endure, he would not let anyone separate them. They'd found each other in the depths of their respective grief and loneliness, and they'd built something precious from the wreckage of their past lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Billy Thornton's arrival, the beginning of legal proceedings, the mounting pressure from Morrison and his allies. But tonight, in the warm circle of firelight, they were simply father and daughter, holding on to each other and the hope that love could be stronger than law. The chosen family could triumph over social convention. Outside, the spring wind carried the scent of new growth and the promise of better days ahead. Sam chose to believe that promise included them both. The courthouse in Helena was an imposing limestone building that seemed designed to intimidate those who sought justice within its walls. Sam stood on its steps with Lucy beside him, both dressed in their finest clothes, his one good suit that still smelled faintly of mothballs, her new blue dress that Margaret had insisted on buying for the occasion. In Sam's weathered hands were the adoption papers that would either secure their future together or mark the beginning of the end. "You sure about this?" Old Pete asked, adjusting his own uncomfortable tie. He'd driven them the 60 miles to the county seat, unwilling to let them face this moment alone. "Never been more sure of anything in my life," Sam replied, though his stomach churned with nervous energy. The week since Frank Morrison's ultimatum had passed in a blur of legal consultations, community meetings, and increasingly heated arguments that divided the town along lines no one had expected. Margaret O'Brien had worked tirelessly to organize support, while Father Miguel had delivered a sermon that left half his congregation walking out in protest and the other half standing in ovation. "Remember," Margaret said, appearing beside them with her lawyer's briefcase and determined expression, "Judge Hartley is fair but traditional. He'll want to see that this adoption serves Lucy's best interests, not just our emotional preferences." Lucy nodded solemnly. At 8 years old, she understood more about the legal complexities of her situation than most adults would have grasped. The past week had aged her in ways that broke Sam's heart, the weight of knowing that her future hung in the balance of adult prejudices and bureaucratic decisions. Inside the courthouse, they were directed to a conference room where Billy Thornton waited with a representative from the state child welfare office. Thornton looked nervous and kept glancing at his pocket watch, while the welfare officer, a stern woman named Mrs. Blackwood, reviewed files with the efficiency of someone processing inventory rather than determining a child's future. "Mr. Holloway," Mrs. Blackwood said without looking up from her papers. I have to say this is highly irregular. Emergency custody petitions are typically filed in cases of abuse or neglect, not because someone has grown attached to a temporary ward. Lucy isn't just anyone, Sam replied evenly. She's my daughter in every way that matters. Mrs. Blackwood's eyebrows rose slightly. Biology would suggest otherwise, as would the legal framework that governs child placement in this state. Margaret leaned forward. Mrs. Blackwood, Montana law recognizes that a child's best interests supersede rigid adherence to bureaucratic procedures. Lucy has thrived in Mr. Holloway's care in ways that would be impossible to replicate in an institutional setting. The orphanage provides excellent care, Thornton protested weakly. Does it? Margaret pulled out a folder thick with documentation. Lucy has advanced 2 full grade levels since living with Mr. Holloway. Her health has improved dramatically. She's gained 12 pounds and grown 3 inches. More importantly, psychological evaluations show a remarkable improvement in emotional stability and self-confidence. Mrs. Blackwood accepted the folder with obvious reluctance. As she reviewed the documents, her expression gradually shifted from skeptical dismissal to serious consideration. These test scores are remarkable, she admitted, but academic achievement isn't the only factor we consider in placement decisions. What about love? Lucy asked quietly. The adults turned to look at her in surprise. She'd been silent throughout the discussion, sitting with the careful stillness of someone afraid to draw negative attention. What did you say, dear? Mrs. Blackwood asked. Lucy straightened in her chair, meeting the welfare officer's gaze directly. I asked about love. You're talking about test scores and procedures and what's best for me, but nobody's asking what I want or where I feel loved. Lucy, Sam started, but she held up a small hand. No, Sam. I need to say this. She turned back to Mrs. Blackwood. I've been in the orphanage for 2 years. It's not a bad place, and Mrs. Henderson and some of the other ladies are kind. But it's not home. I've never had a home until I came to live with Sam. The room was silent, except for the scratching of Mrs. Blackwood's pen as she took notes. Go on, she encouraged. At the orphanage, I was just one of many. A problem to be managed until someone decided what to do with me. But with Sam, I'm not a problem. Lucy paused, searching for the right words. I'm his daughter, and he's my father. Not because of papers or blood, but because we chose each other. Mrs. Blackwood set down her pen. What makes you say that, Lucy? Because when I was sick with fever last month, Sam sat up all night taking care of me, because he taught me to ride horses and trusted me to help with important ranch work. Because when other people say mean things about me, he stands up for me even when it costs him something. Lucy's voice grew stronger with each word. And because when I'm scared or sad or happy, he's the person I want to tell first. Sam felt his throat tighten with emotion. This remarkable child was fighting for their family with more courage and eloquence than any lawyer could have mustered. And how do you feel about Mr. Holloway? Mrs. Blackwood asked gently. I love him, Lucy said simply. He saved me from being alone forever. The welfare officer made more notes, then looked at Sam. Mr. Holloway, the financial situation is concerning. Can you provide adequately for Lucy's needs? Before Sam could answer, the conference room door opened and Judge Hartley entered. He was a tall, lean man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Sorry to interrupt, he said, settling into the chair at the head of the table. I thought it might be useful to handle this informally, before we move to formal proceedings. Everyone straightened as the judge opened his own file and reviewed the papers inside. This is an unusual case, Judge Hartley began. Emergency custody petitions are rare, and adoption requests by single men are even rarer. Mr. Holloway, What makes you believe you can provide a better home for Lucy than the state-approved orphanage? Sam took a deep breath. Your Honor, I can't promise I'll be perfect. I'm learning how to be a father as I go along. But I can promise that Lucy will be loved, protected, and given every opportunity to reach her potential. She's already made me a better man, and I believe I can help her become the remarkable woman she's meant to be. And the financial concerns? Sam's jaw tightened. This was where things got difficult. I won't lie to you, sir. The ranch has struggled, and the bank is demanding immediate payment of substantial debts. But Lucy and I are partners. Together, we've started turning things around. Judge Hartley consulted his notes. I understand there's been some community opposition to this arrangement. Some, Sam acknowledged, but there's been support too. People who see what Lucy and I have built together. As if summoned by his words, the conference room door opened again. Margaret led a small procession of people into the room. Father, Miguel, Doc Hartwell, Old Pete, and to Sam's surprise, several other neighbors including the Hendersons from the adjacent ranch. Your Honor, Margaret said, we'd like to speak on behalf of Sam and Lucy's petition. Judge Hartley looked around the crowded room with amusement. This is highly irregular, but given the circumstances, I'll allow brief statements. Father, Miguel spoke first, his voice carrying the authority of moral conviction. Your Honor, I've watched Sam Holloway transform from a broken man consumed by grief into a devoted father who would sacrifice anything for his daughter's well-being. And I've watched Lucy Chen grow from a frightened, withdrawn child into a confident, young woman who knows her worth and her place in the world. What they've built together is nothing short of miraculous. Doc Hartwell was next, her medical training lending weight to her words. From a health perspective, Lucy has thrived under Sam's care. Her physical development has accelerated, her mental health has improved dramatically, and she shows no signs of the anxiety or depression common in institutionalized children. Medically speaking, removing her from this environment would be detrimental to her continued well-being. Old Pete spoke with the blunt honesty of a man who'd lived through enough to know what mattered. Judge, I've known Sam Holloway for 20 years. I watched him nearly destroy himself after his wife died, and I watched Lucy bring him back to life. They're family in every way that counts, and anybody who says different is either blind or has their own agenda. One by one, the neighbors testified to what they'd witnessed. Sam's dedication to Lucy's education, her remarkable contributions to the ranch's success, their obvious devotion to each other. Even Mrs. Henderson, whose initial reaction to Lucy had been lukewarm at best, spoke about the positive changes she'd observed. But Judge Hartley's expression remained carefully neutral throughout the testimonials. When the last speaker finished, he closed his file and looked directly at Lucy. Lucy, do you understand what adoption means? Yes, sir. It means Sam would be my real father legally, not just in my heart. And is that what you want? More than anything in the world. Judge Hartley nodded slowly. Mr. Holloway, I'm going to approve the emergency custody petition, pending a full investigation. Lucy will remain in your care while we complete the adoption process. However, I'm also ordering a comprehensive home study and financial review. If the state determines that you cannot adequately provide for Lucy's needs. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Sam understood the stakes. As they left the courthouse, Sam felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. They'd won the first battle, but the war was far from over. And Frank Morrison had made it clear that the financial deadline remained unchanged, 30 days to pay the bank, or lose the ranch. The drive back to town was subdued despite their legal victory. Lucy dozed against Sam's shoulder while Old Pete navigated the winding mountain roads. But Sam stared out at the passing landscape and wondered how he was going. To find $37,000 in less than a month. Their arrival home brought unexpected developments. Frank Morrison's black sedan was parked in their yard again, but this time he wasn't alone. A small crowd had gathered, some supportive neighbors, but also several families Sam recognized as Morrison's allies. "Looks like we've got company," Pete muttered. As they approached the house, Morrison stepped forward with a document in his hand. "Mr. Holloway, I have a petition signed by concerned citizens requesting immediate review of Lucy's placement. 17 families have signed, expressing their concern about the moral implications of this arrangement." Sam felt Lucy tense beside him. "What kind of concerns, Frank?" "The kind that question whether a single man living alone with an unrelated minor girl creates an appropriate environment for a child's development." Morrison's smile was cold and satisfied. "The kind that wonder what sort of example this sets for our community's children." The implication was clear and disgusting. Sam felt rage building in his chest, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "And what kind of example does your behavior set, Mr. Morrison?" Everyone turned to see Jenny Morrison approaching from the direction of the road. Frank's 12-year-old daughter walked with determined steps, her young face set with conviction that reminded Sam forcibly of her mother before the years of social pressure had worn her down. "Jennifer, get in the car this instant," Morrison commanded. "No, Daddy." Jenny's voice carried clearly across the yard. "I won't watch you try to destroy Lucy's family because you're afraid of people who are different from you." The crowd stirred uncomfortably. A child publicly defying her father was shocking enough, but Jenny wasn't finished. "Lucy is my friend," she continued, moving to stand beside Lucy despite her father's furious glare. "She's smarter and kinder than anyone in our class, and she's helped me with math and stood up for me when Tommy Patterson was being mean. If you make her go back to the orphanage, you'll be hurting the best person I know." Morrison's face had gone white with anger and embarrassment. "Jennifer Morrison, you will apologize this instant and get in that car." "No." Jenny's voice was steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Daddy, but you're wrong about this, and I won't help you be wrong." The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle. Margaret O'Brien's car followed by Father Miguel's truck. They'd brought reinforcements of their own, and soon Sam's yard resembled a town meeting with two distinct camps facing off across the gravel drive. Margaret took charge with the natural authority of someone accustomed to managing unruly groups. "If we're going to have this discussion, let's have it properly. Everyone who wants to speak gets a chance, but we'll be civil about it." What followed was unlike anything the small Montana community had experienced before. A public airing of beliefs and prejudices that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Morrison's supporters spoke about tradition and propriety, about the danger of setting precedents that undermined social order. Sam's allies countered with testimony about love and family, about the evidence of their eyes rather than the assumptions of their fears. Through it all, Lucy stood quietly beside Sam, her small hand gripping his with fierce determination. When some of Morrison's supporters began making increasingly ugly insinuations, she finally spoke up. "You're all talking about me like I'm not here," she said, her clear voice cutting through the adult arguments. "Like I'm a thing to be fought over instead of a person with feelings and opinions." The crowd fell silent, shocked by the interruption. "You want to know if I'm safe with Sam? If he's taking proper care of me? Ask me. I'm the one who would know." Lucy's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Ask me if I have enough food, enough clothes, enough attention. Ask me if I feel loved and protected and valued. Ask me if I'm learning and growing and becoming the person I want to be." She paused, looking around at the faces surrounding her. "But don't ask me to defend the color of my skin or the shape of my eyes, or the fact that my parents didn't look like everyone else's parents. Don't ask me to apologize for being different. And don't ask me to pretend that biology matters more than love when it comes to family." The silence that followed was profound. Even Morrison's most vocal supporters seemed stunned by the eloquence and dignity of the 8-year-old girl they'd been discussing, as if she were an object rather than a person. Father Miguel stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of spiritual authority. In all my years of ministry, I've rarely witnessed such grace under pressure. Lucy, you've shown us what it means to defend truth with love rather than anger. And Sam, you've shown us what it means to put a child's welfare above your own comfort. He turned to address the crowd. I've listened to concerns about tradition and propriety, but I haven't heard anyone explain how separating a child from the father who loves her serves any godly purpose. If our traditions require us to choose legal technicalities over obvious love, then perhaps it's time to examine whether our traditions are worth preserving. Morrison's face darkened. Father Santos, your progressive attitudes might be appreciated in more liberal communities, but this is Montana. We have standards here. Yes, Father Miguel replied calmly. We do have standards. The question is whether those standards are based on Christ's teaching about love and compassion, or on fear and prejudice disguised as righteousness. The confrontation might have escalated further, but old Pete stepped forward with the practical authority of his 70 years. Enough, he said simply. Frank, you've made your position clear, so have the rest of us. Time to let the courts decide instead of turning this into a circus. As the crowd began to disperse, Morrison approached Sam with one final threat. You think you've won something here, Holloway, but the financial reality hasn't changed. 30 days or you lose everything. We'll see, Sam replied evenly. That evening, as Sam and Lucy sat on their porch watching the sunset behind the mountains, Lucy asked the question that had been weighing on both their minds. What if we lose the ranch? What if you can't pay the bank? Sam was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer honestly without frightening her more than necessary. Then we'll figure something else out. Find another place. Start over if we have to. Together? Together, Sam promised. Whatever happens, we face it together. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sam reflected on how much had changed since that night in the town hall, when he'd impulsively bid on a frightened little girl. The battles ahead were daunting. Financial ruin, legal challenges, social pressure that threatened to tear their community apart. But sitting with Lucy beside him, feeling the solid presence of the daughter who'd saved his life in more ways than she could know, Sam found himself cautiously optimistic. They'd survived winter's worst storm. They'd faced down prejudice and bureaucracy. They'd stood together against forces that wanted to separate them. Whatever came next, they would meet it as a family, chosen, tested, and unbreakable. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the mountains, promising the kind of spring storm that would bring life to the parched earth. Sam chose to interpret it as a good omen. The Helena courthouse had never seen anything quite like it. By 9 a.m, an hour before the formal custody hearing was scheduled to begin, the parking lot was full and people were gathering on the courthouse steps like they were waiting for a traveling show. Word had spread through the county that the Holloway adoption case would be decided today, and it seemed like half of Montana had an opinion about whether a Chinese-Irish orphan belonged with a widowed rancher. Sam adjusted his tie for the 10th time as he and Lucy climbed the courthouse steps together. She wore the blue dress Margaret had bought her, but she'd insisted on braiding her own hair with the simple practicality that had become her trademark. Her small hand was steady in his, though Sam could feel the tension thrumming through her small frame. Remember, Margaret said, falling into step beside them, answer only what you're asked. Be honest, be yourself, and trust that the truth will be enough. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. Judge Hartley had moved the proceedings to the largest courtroom available, but even so, people lined the walls and crowded into the aisles. Sam spotted familiar faces throughout the room, supporters like Old Pete and Father Miguel sitting near the front, while Frank Morrison held court among his allies near the back. All rise for the Honorable Judge Hartley, the bailiff announced. Judge Hartley entered with the measured dignity of a man who understood the weight of the decision before him. He surveyed the packed courtroom with sharp eyes before settling into his chair. "This is a formal adoption hearing," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "While public interest is understandable, I expect absolute decorum. Anyone who disrupts these proceedings will be removed immediately." The state's case was presented first by Mrs. Blackwood, who outlined the legal framework governing child placement with methodical precision. Billy Thornton testified about the orphanage's capabilities and Lucy's history there, painting a picture of institutional competence, if not warmth. Then Frank Morrison took the stand. "Mr. Morrison," the state's attorney began, "as a prominent community member and the holder of Mr. Holloway's mortgage, you've expressed concerns about this adoption. Can you elaborate?" Morrison straightened in his chair, clearly relishing his moment of authority. "Your Honor, this case isn't really about adoption at all. It's about a man using an unfortunate child to solve his own problems." "Objection," Margaret called out, rising to her feet. "Speculation and character assassination?" "Sustained," Judge Hartley said dryly. "Mr. Morrison, please confine yourself to facts." Morrison's jaw tightened, but he continued. "The facts are these. Samuel Holloway is a man who has struggled with depression, alcohol abuse, and financial irresponsibility since his wife's death. His ranch is in foreclosure, he has no experience with children, and he lives in isolation miles from proper social services." Sam felt Lucy's hand tighten in his, but her expression remained calm as she listened to Morrison's catalog of his supposed failures. "Furthermore," Morrison continued, his voice growing more confident, "the child in question comes from a problematic background. Mixed race, no family connections, no social standing in our community. Mr. Holloway's attachment to her is questionable at best, inappropriate at worst." A murmur ran through the courtroom at the barely veiled implications. Judge Hartley's expression darkened. "Mr. Morrison, are you making specific allegations about Mr. Holloway's conduct?" Morrison seemed to realize he'd gone too far, but his prejudices had been exposed for everyone to see. "I'm simply saying that the entire arrangement defies conventional standards of propriety." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," the judge said coldly. "You may step down." Margaret rose for cross-examination, and Sam could see the glint in her eyes that he'd learned to recognize when she was about to dismantle an opponent. "Mr. Morrison, you mentioned Mr. Holloway's supposed alcohol abuse. Do you have evidence of this?" Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Well, no specific evidence, but yes or no, Mr. Morrison. Do you have evidence?" "No." "You mentioned depression. Are you qualified to make psychological diagnoses?" "I don't need a degree to see when a man isn't functioning properly." "But you do need evidence to make allegations in a court of law. Do you have any documented proof of neglect or abuse of Lucy?" Morrison's face was reddening. "The very nature of the situation is what, Mr. Morrison? A man providing a loving home for a child who needed one, helping her achieve academic success, giving her opportunities for growth and development?" Margaret's voice carried across the courtroom like a blade. "Or is your real objection to the fact that Lucy doesn't look like the children you think deserve love and family?" "Objection," the state's attorney called. "Withdrawn," Margaret said smoothly. "No further questions." When it came time for Sam's supporters to testify, the contrast was stark. Father Miguel spoke about the spiritual transformation he'd witnessed in both Sam and Lucy. Doc Hartwell provided detailed medical testimony about Lucy's improved health and psychological well-being. Margaret presented Lucy's academic achievements and teacher evaluations that painted the picture of a gifted child thriving under Sam's care. But it was old Pete who provided the most surprising testimony. "Your Honor," Pete said, settling into the witness chair with the deliberate movements of his 70 years. "I need to clear up something about Sam's financial situation." Sam leaned forward, confused. He'd been dreading questions about the ranch's debts and his inability to meet Morrison's demands. "Mr. Kowalski," Margaret prompted, "what would you like the court to know?" Pete pulled out a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "This is a bill of sale, dated 3 days ago. I purchased Samuel Holloway's prize breeding bull for the sum of $40,000. A gasp ran through the courtroom. Sam stared at his old friend in shock. The bull was valuable, but not nearly worth that much, and Pete didn't have that kind of money anyway. Furthermore, Pete continued, this bill of sale represents the pooled contributions of 17 families in our community who believe in what Sam and Lucy have built together. We've seen how they've helped each other heal and grow, and we wanted to ensure their future together." Sam felt tears prick his eyes as the significance of Pete's words sank in. His neighbors, people he'd thought barely tolerated him, had secretly organized to save his ranch and secure Lucy's future. "Mr. Kowalski," Judge Hartley said gently, "are you saying that members of your community have contributed money to help Mr. Holloway meet his financial obligations?" "Yes, sir. Because we've seen what real family looks like and we know it's worth protecting." The murmur that ran through the courtroom was different now, softer, more thoughtful. Even some of Morrison's supporters looked moved by Pete's testimony. Finally, it was Lucy's turn to speak. She approached the witness stand with the same calm dignity she'd shown throughout the proceedings, though Sam could see the nervousness in her small movements. "Lucy," Judge Hartley said gently, "do you understand why we're here today?" "Yes, sir. You're deciding whether Sam can be my real father." "And what do you want me to decide?" Lucy looked directly at the judge, her voice clear and steady. "I want you to decide based on what's best for me, not what makes other people comfortable." What do you think is best for you?" "Being with Sam," Lucy said without hesitation. "He's taught me that I'm worth something, that I can do anything I set my mind to. He's shown me what it feels like to be someone's first priority, to matter, to another person." "And how has living with Mr. Holloway changed you?" Lucy considered the question seriously. "At the orphanage, I tried to be invisible because being noticed usually meant trouble. With Sam, I learned to take up space, to have opinions, to believe my voice matters. He made me brave." "What makes you believe Mr. Holloway would be a good father?" "Because he already is one," Lucy said simply. "Not because of papers or blood, but because he chose to love me when no one else would. And he keeps choosing to love me, even when it costs him something." Judge Hartley made notes as she spoke, his expression thoughtful. "Lucy, what would you say to people who think you don't belong in this community?" Lucy's chin lifted slightly. "I'd say that belonging isn't about looking like everyone else or having the same background. It's about contributing something good, caring about your neighbors, and standing up for what's right. By that measure, I belong here more than the people who want to send me away." The courtroom was absolutely silent as Lucy concluded her testimony. Even Morrison looked subdued by the eloquence and maturity of the child he'd tried to paint as a burden. But the day's most dramatic moment came when Jenny Morrison suddenly stood up in the gallery. "Your Honor," she called out, her young voice shaking with determination. "May I say something?" Judge Hartley looked surprised but nodded. "Come forward, young lady." Jenny walked to the front of the courtroom, ignoring her father's furious whispers behind her. She was 12 years old, blonde and privileged, everything Lucy was not. But her words carried the weight of moral conviction. "My name is Jenny Morrison. Lucy is my best friend, and I want the court to know that she's the kindest, smartest, bravest person I've ever met. She's helped me with school, stood up for me when I was scared, and taught me what real friendship means." Jenny turned to look directly at her father. "Daddy, I love you, but you're wrong about Lucy and Sam. They're family in the way that matters, most. And if you can't see that, then you're the one who doesn't belong in a community that's supposed to care about children." Frank Morrison's face had gone white with rage and embarrassment, but he didn't speak as his daughter returned to her seat among the gallery. Judge Hartley surveyed the courtroom one final time before speaking. "This court will recess for deliberation. I'll announce my decision in 1 hour." As people filed out of the courtroom, Sam felt both exhausted and strangely hopeful. They'd laid everything bare: their love, their hopes, their commitment to each other. The rest was beyond their control. "Whatever happens," he whispered to Lucy as they sat together in the hallway, "I'm proud of you. You were magnificent in there." Lucy leaned against his shoulder, suddenly looking every bit of her 8 years. "Do you think he'll let us stay? Together?" "I think," Sam said carefully, "that anyone who heard you speak today knows exactly where you belong." Around them, their supporters gathered in quiet solidarity, while Morrison's allies huddled in increasingly uncomfortable-looking groups. The battle lines had been drawn not just around Sam and Lucy, but around competing visions of what community and family should mean. In 1 hour, they would know whether love was stronger than prejudice, whether chosen family could triumph over social convention, whether an unlikely father and daughter could build something lasting from the fragments of their broken hearts. The reckoning had arrived. Judge Hartley returned to the courtroom exactly 1 hour later, his expression giving nothing away as the packed gallery held its collective breath. Sam felt Lucy's small hand slip into his, her fingers surprisingly steady despite everything that hung in the balance. "Please rise," the bailiff announced, and the room filled with the rustle of 300 people getting to their feet. Judge Hartley settled behind his bench and opened the file before him. The silence was so complete that Sam could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. "In the matter of the adoption petition of Samuel Holloway," the judge began, his voice carrying clearly through the courtroom, "this court has considered extensive testimony regarding the best interests of the minor child, Lucy Chen." Sam's grip on Lucy's hand tightened involuntarily. "While the circumstances of this case are admittedly unusual," Judge Hartley continued, "the evidence presented has been overwhelming in one critical aspect. This child has not merely survived in Mr. Holloway's care, she has flourished." A murmur of hope rippled through Sam's supporters. Lucy's academic achievements, her emotional stability, her physical health, and most importantly, her own articulate testimony about her feelings and needs have convinced this court that her best interests lie in permanency with the man she has come to regard as her father. Sam felt his knees go weak. Lucy gasped softly beside him. "Therefore, the adoption petition is granted. Lucy Chen is hereby legally adopted by Samuel Holloway, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails." The courtroom erupted in cheers from Sam's supporters, while Frank Morrison's allies sat in stunned silence. Sam pulled Lucy into his arms, both of them crying tears of relief and joy as their friends and neighbors surrounded them with congratulations. "She's really mine," Sam whispered against Lucy's hair. "You're really my daughter." "I always was," Lucy whispered back. "Now it's just official." But their celebration was short-lived. As they emerged from the courthouse into the afternoon sunshine, Frank Morrison was waiting beside his black sedan with Sheriff Davies and another man Sam didn't recognize. "Mr. Holloway," Morrison called out, his voice carrying the cold satisfaction of someone playing a final card. "Congratulations on your legal victory. However, that doesn't change our business arrangement." He handed Sam a manila envelope. "Foreclosure papers. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises." Sam felt the bottom drop out of his world. In the euphoria of winning custody, he'd almost forgotten about the ranch. Now the reality crashed over him like ice water. "Frank, you can't," Old Pete started, but Morrison cut him off. "The bank's patience has been exhausted. Mr. Holloway has had ample opportunity to meet his obligations. The property will be auctioned to recover our losses." Lucy looked up at Sam with wide eyes. What does this mean? Sam's throat felt like sandpaper. It means we might have to find somewhere else to live, sweetheart. But I thought old Pete said the neighbors helped. The bull sale covered the immediate debt, Pete said grimly. But there are other obligations, penalties, legal fees. We're still short about $15,000. Morrison smiled coldly. Exactly $15,437 to be precise. Due in full by end of business tomorrow, or the sheriff will escort you from the property. As Morrison drove away, Sam stood holding the foreclosure papers, feeling the crushing weight of losing everything just when he'd gained what mattered most. But then Lucy tugged on his sleeve. Sam, what about my college fund? What college fund, honey? The money Mama and Papa saved for my education. Mrs. Henderson at the orphanage kept it for me. It's not much, but... Margaret stepped forward, her legal mind already working. Lucy, how much money are we talking about? I don't know exactly. Maybe $3,000? Papa always said education was an investment in the future. Sam shook his head. Lucy, that's your money. I won't take your future to save the ranch. But Lucy looked at him with the same determined expression she'd worn in the courtroom. Sam, you are my future. The ranch is our home. That money is supposed to help me build a life. And I can't build a life without you. Old Pete cleared his throat. There's something else you should know. The Henderson family from the next valley over heard about what happened in court today. They want to contribute $1,000. Said they admired what you'd both accomplished. Margaret nodded. And the Kowalski cousins from Billings called. They're sending $500. One by one, more neighbors stepped forward with offers of help. Some had been at the courthouse and been moved by Lucy's testimony. Others had heard about the judgment and wanted to support the family that had captured the community's heart. The young folks have been busy too, Father Miguel added with a smile. Jenny Morrison organized a bake sale at the school, raised almost $400. Sam looked around at the faces surrounding them, some people he'd known for years, others who had been strangers or even opponents just hours before. The community that had been divided by prejudice and fear was coming together around love and hope. I don't know what to say, Sam managed. Say you'll let us help, Pete replied. Simply. Say you'll let this community be what it's supposed to be. Lucy squeezed Sam's hand. Please, Sam. Let them help us the way you helped me. Sam looked down at his daughter, legally his daughter now, and saw the wisdom that had grown from her own experiences with accepting help when it was offered with love. All right, he said, his voice thick with emotion. All right. As the sun set behind the mountains, the impromptu gathering in front of the courthouse had transformed into something like a celebration. Money was pooled, commitments made, and plans formed to ensure that Sam and Lucy would keep their home. Frank Morrison's campaign to destroy their family had instead revealed the deep wells of compassion and decency that existed within their community. His attempts to divide had ultimately united people around values that transcended prejudice and fear. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and the hard work of rebuilding. But tonight, Sam and Lucy stood surrounded by a community that had chosen love over hate, hope over fear, and family over the narrow definitions of blood and law. The grace they'd found was unexpected but deeply felt, the grace of belonging, of being accepted not despite their differences, but because of the strength they'd shown in overcoming them together. The Harvest Festival had never been quite like this one. 6 months after the courthouse battle that had divided and ultimately united their community, the annual celebration felt less like routine and more like redemption. Sam stood at the edge of the town square, watching Lucy demonstrate sheep-shearing techniques to a crowd of fascinated children, and marveled at how much had changed. The Holloway ranch was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. Lucy's innovative ideas, the sheep operation, rotational grazing, diversified crops, had turned their struggling property into one of the most profitable in the county. Other ranchers now came to them for advice, and Sam found himself in the unexpected role of community leader, sharing knowledge he and Lucy had learned together. "She's something special, that daughter of yours," said Doc Hartwell, joining Sam at the fence rail where he was watching the demonstration. "That she is," Sam replied, unable to keep the pride from his voice. Lucy had been accepted into a special correspondence program for gifted students, allowing her to advance academically while staying home on the ranch. Margaret O'Brien predicted she'd be ready for college by age 16 if she wanted. "Hard to believe how much trouble she caused Frank Morrison," Doc continued with a slight smile. Sam followed her gaze to where Frank Morrison stood awkwardly near the refreshment table, looking like a man who'd lost a war he'd started. His campaign against Sam and Lucy had backfired spectacularly, costing him both social standing and business as people chose to bank elsewhere. His own daughter Jenny had become Lucy's closest friend and fiercest defender, creating a rift in the Morrison family that was only now beginning to heal. As if sensing their observation, Morrison approached with the hesitant steps of someone swallowing considerable pride. "Sam," he said stiffly. "Lucy." Lucy looked up from her demonstration, her expression polite but wary. "I owe you both an apology," Morrison continued, the words clearly difficult for him. "My behavior was inappropriate, prejudiced, wrong." He paused, struggling with emotions he wasn't accustomed to expressing publicly. "You've both proven me wrong in every way that matters." Sam studied the man who had nearly destroyed their family. "Frank, I appreciate that. Takes courage to admit when you're wrong." Morrison nodded curtly and walked away, but Sam noticed he stopped to watch Lucy's demonstration, his expression thoughtful rather than hostile. Later that evening, as the festival wound down and families headed home under the early autumn stars, Sam and Lucy made their way to the small cemetery on the hill overlooking town. They walked hand in hand to Sarah's grave, where Sam knelt to place fresh wildflowers Lucy had picked. "Sarah," Sam said quietly, "I want you to meet our daughter. Lucy, she's smart and brave and kind, just like you were. I think you would have loved each other." Lucy knelt beside him, placing her own small bouquet next to his. "I wish I could have known you," she whispered. "But thank you for loving Sam first. It taught him how to love me." As they walked home to the ranch, Lucy slipped her hand into Sam's. "Do you think she would have approved? Of us, I mean." Sam squeezed her hand gently. "Sweetheart, Sarah always said that family wasn't about blood or law or what other people expected. It was about choosing to love someone every single day, no matter what. By that measure, we're exactly the family she would have wanted." The ranch house appeared before them, warm light spilling from the windows onto the porch where they'd shared so many quiet evenings. The barn stood solid and proud, sheltering the animals they'd learned to care for together. The field stretched toward the mountains, fertile and full of promise for next year's planting. "What should we do tomorrow?" Lucy asked as they climbed the porch steps. Sam smiled, thinking of all the possibilities ahead. Lucy's education, the ranch's expansion, the community they'd helped heal and that had healed them in return. "Whatever we want," he said simply. "We have all the time in the world." As they settled into their evening routine, Sam reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A desperate bid at an orphanage auction had become the foundation of a love that had transformed not just two broken lives, but an entire community's understanding of what family could mean. Outside, the Montana wind carried the scent of harvest and the promise of winter's rest before spring's renewal. Inside, a father and daughter planned tomorrow's work and dreamed of futures filled with endless possibility, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges came, they would face them together. Home, Sam realized, wasn't just a place. It was the choice to belong to each other, day after day, season after season, for all the years ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.